What led you to become a hitman?
Um, yeah, I mean, when you grow up in the kind of neighborhood I grew up in, you're basically faced with a life of crime, and the people you try to emulate and become are mostly drug dealers and killers and armed robbers. Basically, the societal vices led me to become that. It's not something I'm proud of, but you know, it happened.
Being a cinematographer, you constantly have to be working on your craft and finding different solutions to different problems. One of the main things we are tasked with is creating the visuals of film. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how to light an interview. The first thing that I noticed when I was watching Ladbible was always their camera setup or the camera where it's positioned. Like they usually shoot shadow side, and their lighting, they use the 3 lighting setup. So they have a key light, they have the field light, and then they have a hair light on top of the subject. And it doesn't necessarily change because I think they film in a studio, so it's the lighting system is already set up. And it looks like they're using some mats like an Amaran F, I think those are the FC somethings, which cost a lot, not gonna lie, but I think they do a good job, and I think they're already fitted in the studio, so people just come in and sit. Because sometimes you see how the lighting behaves on different subjects, like shorter people and taller people. For taller people, you can see the hair light really like bouncing off that person's head and shining in it, and then for shorter people, it's a perfect hair light. So the first thing, and in the frame that we made, hopefully you can see it, it's essentially the same thing that I did with this. The first step was I used newer panel lights. Those are, the cheapest version of those lights that those guys have. And to do that, I put one panel light on a C stand as a hair light, and that was set to around 10% in terms of intensity, because I didn't want it to be harsh. And then on the side light that you see in there is a way it's diffused but there's no grid, I had another newer panel just hitting him or subject from the side, and then I put that also down to around 20%. And then for my key light, I used the Amaran 200D, and I think I put a softbox on it just to be able to control the light. One thing I wish I had done was to do a double stack diffusion, because if you put a bigger diffusion in front of it, it creates this more soft looking light compared to the diffusion. But I think having those 3 lights hitting the subject from one side of the room works. But also one thing you notice when you're watching Ladbible videos is on the other side, there's the shadows are so defined. And to do that, I ended up, because in our house, the wall is white, so I ended up putting a black cloth on there just to stop the light from bouncing back into the subject. And then that creates that sort of look that I was looking for. After that, it's just about playing with the intensity to get the right exposure in your camera, and look at your waveform and see if the camera is getting enough information. But in terms of everything else, I felt like we got it. One thing that I didn't do, which I noticed that I think they light their background, but for me, I didn't know where to position the light for the background. In the Ladbible videos, it looks as if the light is coming from the bottom hitting the background, or I could be wrong. But I ended up not doing that because I felt like I was already getting enough light because of the hair light to separate the subject from the background, And yeah, that was pretty much it. With such a setup, we had it. And then in post, for my light, so I set all the lights to 4.1 Kelvin, which in reflection maybe was not a good idea because it was super hard to color grade. And I'm thinking maybe at 5.6 daylight would have worked, or if I had gone the extreme 3.2 tungsten, and then when you whiten, I think they use tungsten. I've just been looking at the way their skins look like in the videos, and I think they film it at tungsten. I don't know what type of camera that they're using. And then we shot it on a 50mm. I think a 35 would have been better. And then I think having a 35 would have been better, but you'd also need like a bigger backdrop, and we didn't have that. I was just using resources that are already in my house. To get a fuller image like what I've shown you, we ended up using AI generated film in Photoshop. I just put in expand the backdrop, and then it expands and fills in those parts. So I think as someone who's not a major advocate for AI, it has its uses, and in this case, it helps. I think that as a tool, it's there to assist. What we don't want is for it to become a thing that is going to replace people's work. For the audio, I have a Sennheiser MK600, and then I was just running it into my Zoom H6 to record the audio, and this worked perfectly. And I think as a one-man crew, it took me around about an hour to set up this whole system that I had going on. But that's just because I was one person and I was really trying to copy paste what they do, which worked out. So some of the lessons that I took out of it was, don't be afraid of 3-point lighting. For me, it's something that I don't normally do because I think sometimes my key light bounces off a wall. Like right now, my key light bounces off a wall and then it sort of just acts as the backlight. So I don't normally have a hair light and stuff like that. But I appreciated it just looking at the subject and just looking at what the lighting does. I think having control over your lights is also very important. If you can get lights, like for me moving forward, if I can, I don't know, maybe I might stick just to Amaran, I might move to aperture, I might get non-light and stuff like that. But I would like to be locked into one system whereby I can just operate it and control the lights and shift depending on what you need. I think that if I was to be hired to film an interview, just depending, it's a setup that takes a minute to make, which works for them because I'm assuming they're in a studio and you just set up those lights and you never have to touch them and people just come in, sit and you shoot. But I think for a run and gun setup, it might be too much because, you have to make sure that the light is out of frame. Like they don't care, they put it in frame, but like I think you'd want to have that light out of frame and it's on top of someone, which might not be the safest thing to do, if you don't really have the adequate resources, and sometimes it's not worth taking the risk, but one thing that I took out of the whole thing is there are very different ways of creating a 3D image in a 2-dimension, shadows, playing with shadows, contrast, all those sort of things. And I think that what they do is pretty special, it's pretty amazing because of the storylines that they're touching on. And it's funny how it just works, that setup that they have. So yeah, I hope you learned something from this, how to light a cinematic interview. But yeah, let me know in the comment section. I'm not Roger Dickens, I'm nobody like that, but it was a learning moment, and I'll play a bit of the interview for you to see what it all looked like and sounds like. And I hope you learned something today. How did you justify your actions to yourself at the time?
It comes from a rebellious place where you don't really care about the world. You just wanna do your own thing. And back in the day, I wasn't the strongest kid, not in the class, not in the surrounding or in the neighborhood. So the life of crime became a way of expression, or a way to express my strength. That was basically the justification I had for it, or all I can think about right now.